folks, how you guys doing? Hope you are all having a great day today. The last piece in the office renovation or office remodel is adding a dog gate to the main entry between my office and my dining room. There's no door there, it's just a 32-inch opening, and I need some type of gate to keep the dogs in there when they're not supervised. So for that reason, I'm making a dog gate. I've got my design ready to go. I've got my material ready to go. So let me bring you in closer. Let's talk about the design. Let's talk about the materials, and then we'll get to cutting some wood. I did not make any plans for this dog gate because it is kind of specific to my situation. But if you want the dimensions, well, here you go. So this design is pretty basic. We've got 2 rails, 3 stiles, 2 panels. When it's all said and done, I'll cut a slight curve in the top. We've got just a little bit of decoration going on these stiles, and these 2 red blocks on either side. This side over here is the mounting block where the hinges will be, and then this side is kind of, I guess, the capture block, whatever you want to call it. There's going to be a rabbet cut on the inside corner right here on this red piece so that the gate fits down into this and prevents any type of open area for the dogs to get behind and pull up and kind of open the gate. That's never been a problem with what I've been using now for a gate as far as them pulling it open, but this is going to be a long-term solution, so you might as well take that into consideration. Now, as far as the material goes, as you can see here, I am using 8/4 material. This is 8/4 Bubinga, and I want this to be about 3/4 of an inch, as thick as possible to get 2 pieces out of each thickness of this 8/4 stock. So as you can see here, I've got my 2 boards laid out, 1 and 2, and they're laid out in pairs because I'm going to get 2 pieces per thickness here. So hopefully I should be able to get everything out of these 2 pieces right here as far as the rails and stiles go. All of the rails and stiles will come from these 2 boards, like I said, and as you can see, it's primarily straight grain material. There are a couple knots that I can hopefully work around. I may end up having to unfortunately include one here or there, not the end of the world. And then there's also on the opposite corners of one of these boards has a little bit of curving to it, so not the most desirable lumber, but some pretty good stuff nonetheless. And these will be primarily straight grain rails and stiles. To contrast that, for the panels, I got this piece of wood, and it is the opposite of that. It's got a lot of figure. There's a solid curve going on through the entire board, and throughout the curve there are some compression details too, which are pretty nice. So the goal is to contrast the straighter grain material with panels that have a lot going on. And for the panels, I think I need about 14.5 inches, something like that. So I'm going to take 2 pieces of this and book match it for each one of the panels. So there will be 2 book matched panels to go in between all of this other stuff. My only concern with this is not the figure, but it's the color match of the wood. So these 2 boards, as you can tell, came from the same board. This was the same cut on the tree. This, who knows if it's even the same tree? Probably not. There's a slight color change here. I'm not sure how much of that will even up over time. But going through my lumber stack, this is the best selection for this particular situation. So now that I know what's going on, I'm going to lay out my material and get to milling some of the pieces. When you're milling lumber, you typically want to break up the milling stage into multiple days. That way, as you mill a little bit of material off, it has an opportunity to release any type of internal stresses and then also further acclimate to the environment. During all that, you may end up getting a little bit more cup, bow, or twist. So if you break the milling stage into multiple millings over multiple days, you're more likely to end up with a flatter surface when it's all said and done, because you have more opportunities to mill out all of those little defects. I'm going to kind of break that rule today because I'm down to 13/16 as it is. All of my pieces are as straight as I can see, and nothing really moved quite a bit as I was cutting it out on the bandsaw. So that tells me that there's not that many internal stresses in this wood. Ideally, I would like to break it up, but I just ran out of thickness. I don't want to go any thinner than this. I can go down to 3/4 of an inch, but I don't want to. So I'm going to cut these down to their final size now, and then we'll go ahead and knock out the joinery. With all my pieces cut, I have them clamped together so that I can lay out for the joinery. For the joints, I'm using slip tenons, loose tenons, floating tenons, whatever you want to call them. Basically, these are dominoes. Specifically, it's a hardwood beech tenon, and it goes in between two boards where there are two mortises cut on each side of the joint. So you can lay them out like so, strike a line in between each one of the boards, and use the machine to cut a mortise into each side of the joint, and then glue in one of these little tenons. Now, as you can see, I've got two down here at the bottom rail and only two up here at the top rail, even though this top rail is much wider than the bottom. And the reason being is I have a curve that I'm going to put in this top over here, an arc, and it's going to drop down by 1 inch on either side. And if I was to forget about this and put, say, 3 in this joint, because there is plenty enough room for 3, then as I cut this curve, I would be unpleasantly reminded of my little error of including this. So now that everything's laid out, I can go ahead and cut my joints. It is the next morning, and I stopped yesterday because I got, two reasons. I stopped because I got a little bit frustrated cutting something out of order, and I think I cut something out of order because I had some time constraints outside of the shop, so I was trying to rush, which is never a good thing to do. But anyway, I cut the groove on one of these interior panel areas too soon. I should not have cut this just yet. Instead, I should have broken down this dry assembly, cut the detail on these interior faces of all the stiles, and then cut the groove. It's not the end of the world. I'll just have to recut this. The router table hasn't changed, so the setup should still be the same, and my coffee has not kicked in just yet, apparently. So let me break this down, and we'll use the CNC machine to cut all of the details on these pieces. Now, I'm using the CNC machine. It's not 100% necessary, but by the time I cut an accurate template with the bandsaw, trace that to my material, cut out all the pieces at the bandsaw, and then try and sand all the faces nice and flush, it's just going to be easier to cut them all out on the CNC machine. A lot of people comment on the overall clean and tidy appearance of my shop. Cleaning up as I go is one of the reasons why it stays clean, and a clean and organized shop it's just so much more inviting and encouraging to work in. So the biggest advice I can give anybody watching this is to make it quick and convenient to keep clean. And if it's not convenient, then it just won't get done. So for the past few years, I've had one of these 28-foot Rockler Dust Right hoses attached to my dust collection system, and that means it's always set up and ready to go, which makes it very convenient to clean. So in this particular situation, it took me less than 2 minutes to clean up all of that mess that the router table made. It's just quick and easy. Right before cutting this out, I made a design change so that this cutout resembles a little bit more of the green and green style than what I initially came up with. And I like the way that it turned out, so I'm going to run with this particular style. And instead of having that single radius or that single arch at the top, I'm going to continue this design so that it'll be basically notched out on one side, up in the middle, and then notched out on the other side as well. It'll match this quite well. That's all fine and dandy. I still need to notch out the interior corners of this panel groove where the radius of the router bit just didn't make a crisp corner. I'll notch that out, but first I need to go ahead and get the panels that are going to go in here milled up and glued together. These two panels are going to look pretty good, I think. My only concern is, as the blade was exiting the cut on the bandsaw, I think I'm getting some tear out or I think I've gotten some tear out because of that. I didn't recall seeing any tear out off of the jointer. So that means I need to clean up these edges real nice and neat before gluing them together. Now I milled these a little bit thicker than what I need. They're about 3/8 of an inch thick, and then I'll use the drum sander to get them down to right at 1/4 of an inch thick. By folding the pieces together with the jointed edge facing down, clamping the two pieces together and putting them in a vise, you can plane away all of the little small pieces of tear out and also result in a nice, smooth, perfect joint that's ready for glue up. The hinge board as well as the catch board that will be mounted to the wall, those need a rabbet cut in them, and that's easy to do with just 2 passes at the table saw. And that is this board over here on this far side, as well as this board over here. Obviously the hinges mount over here. This is a flush mount system. I will mortise the hinges in place, but these 2 surfaces right here are nice and flush. And then on this side, these surfaces are flush once again, and I wanted this like this because I don't want the dogs to be able to get behind it and pull up. This extra space down here is for the baseboard, so they can't really do much there. And they've never gotten behind my temporary solution and pulled it forward, so I don't think that's going to be an issue. But this is a nice cleaner look and solves that little requirement. So first up, I need to mount the hinges. Let me get all this clamped together and the hinges clamped down, and we'll explain that process. A little bit of a complicated looking setup here, but it makes sense. So I want a 1/8 of an inch spacing in between these 2 boards. So I took 1/8 of an inch drill bits, stuck them in the gap, and this clamp in the middle holds everything together. So there's my perfect spacing. And I want to maintain that perfect spacing once I mount it on the wall. And anytime you mount a gate or anything or a door that has it has all of its connection points on one side, then sometimes, depending on the quality of hinges you use, the door or gate, whatever, will sag, and at the top will open up that gap, and here at the bottom it will shrink down that gap. So to prevent that, I've already taken slack into consideration with these hinges. These hinges are not perfect. They do have a little bit of slack. So these clamps on the back side locate the hinges, and the clamps up here on top, what they do is on this top one, I'm using the barrel and this face over here to spread apart these 2 pieces of the hinge, reduce the slack in the opposite direction, so it's pulling them apart. And then opposite of that, this clamp over here is putting a force onto this barrel to kind of close the slack on this hinge over here. So as it's mounted, if I mount it properly into these mortises, as the gate is mounted, I shouldn't have any type of rotational force from gravity in the opposite side of the gate wanting to spread apart the gap at the top and wanting to compress or close this gap over here. I've already taken that into consideration with these hinges before using the marking knife to locate the mortise. So with all that said, now I can use my marking knife to properly locate the perimeter of the mortise, and then use a handheld router to remove the bulk, if not all of the material, up to my marking knife lines. And then if necessary, I can use a chisel to clean up all of the mortises so that we are nice and perfect with the perimeter markings from the marking knife. The mortise is on the stationary side of the hinge, very basic. It's just basically a wide dado, and it fits, no problems. For the other side, the movable side of the hinge, this had to have a little bit of cutting in around here. This shape is a little bit more intricate than what I thought. I thought it was just a regular radius, but no problem at all. All these corners can be cut nice and sharp with a chisel, and this radius is difficult to get with the chisel, but if you take your time with the router, you can go right up to your scoring lines and get a nice accurate fit. So very simple. The only concern here when you mount these type of hinges is making sure that the screws don't pull the hinge away as they're driven shut, away from the registration of the mortise. And to prevent that, I'm going to be using one of these spring-loaded self-centering drill bits, and it is spring-loaded, like I said, and this chamfer all the way around fits into the hole on this hinge right here, and it'll drill a perfectly centered hole rather than just trying to eyeball a hole and then either the bit or the screw itself hitting a piece of the grain and then veering off to one side or the other, and then the screw head not being flush with the hinges. So I'm going to skip all this. I'll get this done probably right before I install the hinges, or right before I install the gate, I should say. Very basic. So next up is the panels. The gate is upside down from your direction, and I have the center line of this opening marked on the inside of the top and bottom rails on both of these. And I have a mark on this panel. These panels are, by the way, are just underneath this on the workbench. And I have a mark to let me know how far in this direction I need to position each one of these panels. Now everything is the way that it should be. I just need to use a pencil to transfer the shape of this opening to the book-matched panel. And then from there I can make an offset line by the same depth as the groove, cut them out on the bandsaw, and then use the drum sander to get these down to their final thickness so that I can finally install them into the gate with the final glue up. Just like with the rest of the Bubinga in my office, the finish I'm using is a water-based polyurethane. And anytime you put anything water-based on wood, well, what does water do to wood? It expands and makes the fibers stick up. So before putting the finish, I went ahead and wiped everything down with a wet rag. That will raise the grain, make the fibers stick up, and then I can knock it back down with some 320 grit sandpaper or some really fine grit sandpaper. And then at that point, the grain is already raised. So when I apply the water-based finish, or the water-based polyurethane, it won't raise the grain and I'll get a smoother finish. And here is the finished view from my dining room looking into my office. Notice that none of the mounting hardware or mounting boards are visible from the outside, and that's on purpose because I wanted it to easily hide out of the way if we pinned it open, which I haven't quite figured out that part. And I also didn't want any obstructions mounted inside the door opening. This is a 32-inch opening, and it is my main entry to and from the shop from the house. So if I'm moving furniture through, I don't want any more obstructions. My only disappointment is the knot that ended up being on the top rail on the outside face. I'm not sure if I mixed up the top rail when laying out for the dominoes, or if I mortised the hinges on the wrong side, but regardless, the knot was supposed to be on the office side of the gate, but that's okay. I still love the way that the whole thing turned out, and it's not that big of a deal. The inside of the gate looks great. The book-matched panels aren't a perfect alignment like they are on the other side, but that is expected due to this being the secondary side. And I really like the fact that I can go through the door without using any of my hands in the event that I'm carrying something. And on the dining room side, it's just simple as pushing your foot forward. On the office side, I can get my boot or my toe around the bottom left corner of the gate to open it, and that technically means that the dogs will be able to do that if they figure it out. But I really don't see that happening. They're really obedient as it is, and they haven't shown any signs of wanting to do that with the gate that we already had. To mount the right side piece to the wall, I used two 3-inch decking screws, and those are located behind the hinges, so you don't see them. And to mount the left side piece, I used two 3-inch decking screws on an angle in the interior corner of the gate rabbet. And this left side is it's a catch for the gate, but it also allows some surface area that in the event I need to add a latch of some kind in the future, there's surface area to do that. I'm not concerned with the dogs, but my little girl is 4 months old right now as I'm making this project, and odds are she's going to be pushing on it here soon. So that's it for this one. Thank you to Rockler Woodworking and Hardware for supporting this video. Be sure to check out my website, jayscustomcreations.com, for more information and to sign up for my email newsletter to get first access to all of my projects. Thanks for watching, and have a great day.